I would like to welcome you to Lake Lansing Baptist Church. It is indeed an opportunity to have you join us again. Trust that you've enjoyed the series we've been having on the book of Esther, and ask for your continued prayers on this. Let's begin with a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, we ask even now that you might touch our hearts, that the Holy Spirit would be our guide and teacher, that we might gain a fuller understanding of this book and the importance it has in not only in the Bible, but even in the encouragement of believers in the faith. We ask it in Christ's name. Amen. Well, we had chapter 7 last week, and it had a rather dramatic ending from that, and what a contrast between the opening of chapter 7 and the opening of chapter 8. It is like the proverbial night and day. Esther and Mordecai were struggling with fears. They and their people were fasting, and they were praying, and consequently the hope of stopping Haman was waning. I cannot imagine, even though the second banquet is to take place, the feelings that Mordecai and Esther must have had, knowing that everything rested on this second meeting. And not only that, but this young woman is going to lay an accusation against the second most powerful man in the kingdom. And if she cannot make a convincing enough argument, she knows that just as Vashti was dismissed, she might be dismissed, and all would be for nothing. Yet before the second banquet had ended, we find that God had quietly intervened and exposed the plot. The enraged king immediately had Haman hanged as a traitor. All of his states were forfeited to the crown, and then he gave them all to Esther. His gift was perhaps a means to calm her anxiety and dread that Haman had put into her life. It had to have been a fearsome moment as he realized he was now on the edge of losing everything. And in that terror that it describes him as, to what extent his motivation is, but he has fallen on or dropped down to the edge of the couch, which violated Persian law. No man must come within 7 paces of someone that was a part of the king's harem. And certainly they were never to touch them on pain of death. Haman doesn't go out with the king. He's fighting for his life against his accuser, and in fear he's there. And however one might act in that moment of terror and fear, that was Haman. But now we find that his houses, his lands, his chattel, his goods, all of his gold and jewels that he had gained while he was prime minister are given to Esther. Mordecai now is going to find his identity revealed, and that will not keep him from being advanced. He has now been elevated to a more prominent position. Only that morning, he had been led through the streets of Shushan, the capital, by none other than Haman. And we find that pompous and yet very humiliated man was walking through the streets, leading the king's horse with a person in the king's garb, and saying in a loud voice, "Here is someone the king has taken delight in." And of course we know he goes home terribly upset, terribly angry. His family says, things are turning against you, and before he can know how to respond, he's called to the banquet. And we find that in a very unusual twist, this sudden blaze of honor, which announced Mordecai as a favorite of the king, has made him widely known throughout the city. It is as though the king, due to a sleepless night, was now making a pre-announcement. Who would have known that Haman's arrogant trek to the palace that morning to take the life of Mordecai would find him mockingly elevated in death upon a gallows 6 stories high? We find in chapter 8, the first verse, "And on that day King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. Now, there are all kinds of reasons that are given in commentaries and studies, but I want you to understand the king has done what the law required. Haman had violated the law on two fronts. Number one, he had violated the law regarding the presence of the queen. He had violated, in a sense, the king, or put him in a position where he was going to kill Mordecai, a man that the king had life was saved by him. And so because of that, it required retribution. The law mandating the seizing of all property, even the family of the condemned would be taken. But now the queen admits that she is related to Mordecai. There in the second part of verse 1, and Mordecai came before the king, and Esther had told how he was related to her. We're not told Ahasuerus' response. You know, sometimes someone would say, but how could she keep it a secret? How could he not know? Understand that the relationship with the queen and the king was not one of intimacy and love as we understand it in our society today. She was chosen, in a sense, by her looks and her graciousness, nothing more. And consequently, the relationship would probably be as cool as well. But Esther had kept her secret through the 4 years she had been queen. Mordecai is brought before the king and introduced. Esther revealed that he was her nearest relative. He was her guardian who had taken her in when she was an orphan. And it was Mordecai who was still to her like a father. Now the king finds himself, in a sense, more obliged and more obligated than he thought. Because only that morning he had shared that he had honored the king, and so he gave him that public demonstration. But now Mordecai comes back. Not only has he saved the wife of the king, or the husband, or the king, excuse me, but then the merits of Mordecai, because now he had saved the life of the king and his wife, the queen. So being brought before the king, Mordecai, no doubt, bowed and did reverence to the king. I mentioned when we started this that Mordecai really led to his own problems, and he refused to bow. And there are all kinds of reasons given by commentators and scholars why he couldn't in good conscience bow. I want you to know, whatever they say that might have been, it would not have been any different. And had he refused to bow to the king, it was all over. This whole thing started out of the pride of two men. And it has led and will lead to the death of many people. But the problem is the death of Haman was not enough. If some means must be devised to enable the Jews to be saved. You see, despite the power of the king, the unalterable law of the Persians and the Medes must remain unviolated. Ahasuerus now sought to mend the great harm that nearly befell the man in whom the king delights. All the trust that he had reposed in Haman, all the power that he had given him, are now transferred to Mordecai. The ring that was once given to Haman is now given to Mordecai. And surely it is an attempt to provide for the law some way to correct what Haman had planned. The king now provides for that means. It's interesting to note that the king does for Mordecai what he had done for Haman. I mean, he's given Mordecai the power to rectify that first decree. So the king took off the signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. The power of the enemy is overthrown, and Esther and Mordecai are safe. He is the king's prime minister. She is the queen. There's no one going to push the law in that direction. So their circumstance has been remarkably altered. But you see, the decree still is unrevoked. And that decree said all Jews, both young and old, little children, children and women. Unable to annul the decree, a means must be found to stop it, and yet the dignity of the law must be untouched. Mordecai's new authority may not be enough. Esther determines to approach the king directly without invitation. And for a second time, she will go before the king. Her concerns are not for her, but for her people. And she seeks more than words and promises. But she does not wait for any kind of approval. In verse 3, now Esther spoke again to the king and fell down at his feet and implored him with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite and the scheme which he had devised against the Jews. Imagine with me again in the sense that the king is on his throne. He's in before court. Esther appears, goes straight in without being announced, and falls at his feet, weeping profusely. We find in verse 4 that the scepter is offered, and the king held out the golden scepter toward Esther. So composing herself, the queen now rises. She will prefix her request with 4 qualifiers. And Esther arose and stood before the king and said, if it pleases the king, and if I have in his sight the same what seems right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes. She's going to try to build a purpose for even listening to her request. Don't write, it is not some kind of a beauty response, some kind of an emotional pull in that sense. Initially, the word, by the way, pleasing means if I am good, if things have been good to you. And if I found in the word there, favor is grace or graciousness. And then if the king does what seems right or acceptable, and I am pleasing in the king's eyes, and I'll be honest with you, I think this is just a woman wanting to find out one more step. It means to be appealing in every way. It's going to let the queen know where she stands. So if I've been good, and if I have found grace in your sight, and if what I'm asking you seems acceptable, and me personally, if I have been appealing in every way. So Mordecai is moved there, and we find his elevation was a strong gesture already of the king's support, and he might be able to help, but it will not stop the attacks on the Jews. So to save her people, the queen needs something more. And so she asks in her 8, 5, and 6, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, the sons of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who were in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that will come to my people, or to endure to see the destruction of my countrymen? And so as we look here, what she is asking, there the word revoke means to reverse or turn back. Turn back the law, revoke the law. And notice, she isn't using the word, in fact, even the law, she uses the word letters, because who's the one that signed the law? So she's trying to be diplomatic to the king. And where does she put the blame? These letters were contrived by Haman. So everything is focused on Haman and not back to the one who signed that. And notice the reason for us. It's nice that you say Mordecai is the power. Mordecai is your prime minister. But you see, Haman couldn't do this without the king's written permission. We need it in writing because we want to protect all of the king's provinces. And the king reminds Esther of what he's done. He has done everything that can be legally allowed. That's all he can do. And Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai, who was probably already seated in the king's court, "Indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they hanged him on the gallows because they tried to lay hands." He's already said that, but he's telling her, this is all I can do. And her approach, it was a touching plea. It was deep with emotion. But she does not attempt to plead the good works or the benevolence or the loyalty of the Jews. She would have him deal with them according to his estimate of her. Do you trust me? Have I been loyal? Have I served you faithfully? Have I been appealing to you in every way? Esther had risked her life for her people, and she is asking Ahasuerus to respond according to the king's thoughts of her. Esther wants, what she wants is beyond the king's power. She is seeking an irrevocable law to fight another irrevocable law. But the touching plea does provide a means of response from the king. The king had detachedly given Haman the authority to write and carry out the plan to destroy the Jews. There had been an appeal, Your Majesty, there's a people, and blah, 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 blah. Okay, good. We'll do whatever you want. Here's a ring, go do it. He doesn't know who these people are. By the way, let me also add this point. The Persians were a real blend and mixture of ethnic groups and races and nations, from India to Greece, from northern, like Iran, all the way down to the northern Sudan in Africa. Imagine the cosmopolitan makeup of that distance. Hundreds of people and smaller kingdoms everywhere. And to the Persians, only if you paid your taxes and your dues, okay. But that's about it. That they allowed their people a great deal of freedom and latitude as long as you brought in the money. So the king says to Haman, go ahead here. He's going to do the same thing with Mordecai. And he gives that there, and he says in verse 8, you yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews, whatever you please, in the king's name, seal it with the king's ring, for whatever is written in the king's name and sealed, no one can revoke. So whatever you want, Esther, whatever makes you happy, Mordecai, here's the ring, here's the power, come up with something. And by the way, the king is being somewhat shrewd in this matter, because if it fails, he can honestly say, hey, I did everything I could. So the effort to save the Jewish people will begin with fervor. And in verse 9, then were the king's scribes called in. And it gives us the date. It's about 3 months in after the other one was written. And everything that Mordecai commanded was written with it. And the deputies and rulers of the provinces from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces. Less than 9 months remain before Haman's decree is put into action. But there was, however, still enough time for a message of grace and to reach the farthest limits of the kingdom before the day of slaughter came. The proclamation from Mordecai is universal as the previous one, and it is written in every language of the empire. The text basically is this in chapter 8, 10 through 12. And he wrote in the king's name and sealed it with the king's ring, whereby the king granted to the Jews in every city to gather themselves together, stand there for their life, to destroy, to slay, and to cause to perish. And it's to take place the exact same day that Haman's decree is to take place. It will be a proclamation that in no sense contradicted Haman's law. Both contain ominous phrases to destroy, slay, and to cause to perish. Both contain the extent of killing men, children, and women. Both decrees gave the killers the property of the destroyed, but the key difference targeted a different response. The decree of Haman gave the people command to destroy the Jews. Mordecai's decree allowed the afflicted Jewish population the legal right to defend themselves. They are encouraged to band together and to stand for their life. The Jews are to do whatever is necessary to protect themselves. We may not be sure of Mordecai's fullest intent of his document. It was brutal. He is meting out charge for charge, opportunity for opportunity, with the exception of the means. We find that in self-defense, the defenders only killed the attackers. In chapter 9, we'll discover that next week. They did not harm women or children. And in the end, though seizing the estates that served to motivate the destroyers, the Jews refused to plunder the land. So on paper, the law provided a means of protection against the greedy attackers, but no time is lost in sending out the joyful news. In verse 13 of chapter 8, a copy of the document is provided as a decree to every province, so that they would be ready on that day to avenge themselves. The decree was given in Shushan the palace, and with condemnation passed, Mordecai is now robed as befits his exalted position. This new law impacted the Jews in the capital city immediately. And in verse 8:15, so Mordecai went out from the presence of the king in royal apparel of blue and white, with a great crown of gold and a garment of fine linen and purple. And the city of Shushan rejoiced and was glad. And more than likely, the city here is a reference to the city of Jews that were getting this news. It was a public declaration that a new leader stood in power with the king. So as rapidly as the couriers could spread throughout the empire, the new law brought celebration. We find in 8:16 and 17, and the Jews had delightness and gladness and joy and honor. And wherever the king's declaration went, they had joy and gladness, a feast and a holiday. The law also greatly impacted those who were not Jews. The text notes that there were many who converted to the Jewish faith. The word converted there is they were Judaized. They became Jews. But I want you to be careful and note why. In verse 17b, then many of the people of the land became Jews because fear of the Jews fell on them. You see, in this whole situation, Mordecai is the unknown factor. He's the brand new prime minister. He evidently has been some man of power and influence because it toppled Haman. He has become the man to fear. So in these positions of those in authority, and those governors will likely assess their situation and take whatever steps are necessary to realign themselves. You do not want to be a supporter of the house of Haman, which no longer exists. They must move away from any Haman connections and present themselves with a pro-Mordecai image. And it's important to notice that it was the word of the king that brought all of this grief and anguish in the first place. The king had spoken. They believed his decree, and they were miserable because of it. Now, through the king's word, it gives them peace and happiness, and it drives away their sorrow. And so God has turned mourning of his people into rejoicing. It was faith in the written word of the king that gave the Jews joy and gladness, even though the formerly dreaded 13th of Adar has yet to come. But the one thing that is ascribed to that is remember the value of hope. It is amazing when we hope And the hope is strong. Our endurance, our ability to even prepare for difficult times is there. And so consequently, hope in the Jewish population had begun to dwindle because no word was coming out of the capital that offered any hope of escape. And less, and even in a sense with Mordecai and Esther, they got this step amazingly. Then he spared her life amazingly. And then she's willing to come to a banquet, and then a second banquet, and now everything is there. And it's all going to rest on the king's attitude toward Esther. If he at that day is not happy, and Haman has a plausible argument or defense, he may side with Haman. But now Mordecai is in power, and the decree has gone out, and there is great celebration, even though in a matter of months the violence will begin. It was not an inward emotion or a passing feeling that gave Mordecai and Esther their assurance. It wasn't those things that they grabbed hold of, that they would not be destroyed as Haman intended. They had something better than feelings or assurance. In this sense, they had, their tears were dried, and their sorrow was calmed down because they rested on the word of the king. And they don't know how this is going to work out. Two competing wars. But now they can fight. They can protect their families. And more importantly, there is hope. So we close tonight. We will finish the series next week. Psalm 51, 5, 11, and 12. But let all those rejoice who put their trust in you. Let them ever shout for joy, because you defend them. Let those also who love your name be joyful in you. For you, O Lord, will bless the righteous. With favor you will surround them as a shield. Thank you. Shall we close in prayer? Heavenly Father, again, we thank you for this day and this time, and we ask your special blessing. Be with the needs of each of us. Father, as we see this amazing turnabout, we know that in your will there is hope. In your promises there is comfort. We thank you for that. We ask this in Christ's name. Amen.